get started. So tonight's topic, as you can see, is what we loosely call politics in the new media. I'm just going to give a very brief introduction, and then we'll turn it over to our panel. I forgot to bring a campus envelope tonight, so the black computer bag there is where you can stuff your questions, at the break or at the end of class. So I just want to sort of set this up and then turn it over to our guests. We shift our attention today from a focus on particular issues, or last week particular battles in a particular place in the case of Wisconsin, and to a more broader consideration of how we communicate politically. And it's important to recognize that we're talking about communication in a number of different forms, in a number of different directions. The way in which citizens keep track of what their governments are doing, the way in which governments communicate to citizens what they're doing, and the way in which vying political factions or political parties compete for the attention or the loyalty of voters. And also, of course, for much of this period, the way in which third parties, the press, acts as a sort of filter in sort of making money off that communication in one direction or the other. And I also want you to keep in mind as we wade through the material tonight of the sort of dramatic changes that we've seen, not only obviously over the course of American history, but even over the course of your short lifetime. Changes in the pace at which information moves due to changes in technology, the ways in which that technology lowers barriers to information, but in some cases also raises them. That's something that Carolyn will look at particularly. And the way in which the audience of that communication can get bigger and can get smaller, right? Because we have what we call broadcasting, that is a single outlet reaching lots of people. But we also have narrowcasting, where people are blogging or twittering to each other. Early in American history, through much of the 18th and early 19th century, political communication was, in many respects, a sort of public event. Aside from the pamphlets with a short life, it was often sort of public events, public speeches, rallies that provided the most reliable form of political communication. Through the end of the 18th century and the 19th century, developments in larger scale printing and the lower cost of that enable more systematic forms of political communication, including one American novelty, the fact that parties printed their own ballots as a pitch to voters until very late in the 19th century. This was also a period which saw the emergence of a partisan press. We sometimes sort of cluck our tongues at the partisanship of an MSNBC or a Fox News today, but in fact it's sort of deeply rooted in American history, the idea that newspapers would represent one party or the other. And in fact, you still see remnants of this in newspapers that are called, the something Democrat or the something Republican. The other important element of the 19th century was, of course, the dramatic expansion of the political audience, with the end of slavery, which brought with it universal suffrage, at least for men, and then with the suffrage movement culminating with the vote for women early in the 20th century. So you have, both dramatic changes in the ability to reach people and an audience for that political communication, which is growing in leaps and bounds. Of course, in our own time, in the 20th century, what we think of primarily, reading back from the digital revolution, is the importance of technology. First radio, then perhaps the telephone as a form of political communication, and then, of course, television. Picture here, some of the sort of archetypal examples. Roosevelt's innovation of the fireside chats in the 1930s, and the famous televised debate between Nixon and Kennedy in 1960, which were widely credited for tipping the election to the more charismatic of the two candidates. would be Kennedy. All of this, of course, is more familiar, I think, to you in our own time, because we're barraged with the observation that technology and changes in technology, from one week to the next, are dramatically changing the ways in which we communicate. And we've seen glimpses of this already. We talked a little bit in response to a question last week about the role of social media in communicating and organizing the protests in Wisconsin. And I also want to underscore, before I turn this over, the important ways in which this links to other things that we've been talking about. Remember, one of the most important, or one of the single functions of public policy that we identified early on was the response to the market failure of asymmetrical information, of information failures. So there's clearly a role in public policy in simply providing channels for communication. And this may be political communication from citizens to their government and back again, but the government also has an important public policy role in managing private forms of communication, in regulating bandwidth, in regulating the frequencies at which radio stations can dispense their message. And of course, this comes back and we'll see this in various aspects of the presentation tonight, to the problem of resources. That, you have a setting in which, speech is free, but resources make a difference. In some respects, they make less of a difference in our information age, but in some respects, they may make more of a difference. So, we have three guests who will offer short presentations in turn. I'm going to introduce them now, so there won't be much interruption as they come up. And then, somewhere around 7:30, 7:45, we'll take our short break, reassemble for questions. First, David Perlmutter, who's the professor and director of the School of Journalism, author of a number of books on political communication and persuasion, including Blog Wars, The New Political Background, and New Media Campaigning in the 2008 Facebook election. David will be followed by Carolyn Tolbert, who's a professor of political science here at the university and a national expert on direct democracy and digital politics. Her books include Digital Citizenship, The Internet Society and Participation, Virtual Inequality, Beyond the Digital Divide, and the forthcoming Digital Cities, the Internet and the Geography of Opportunity. And then mopping up as a sort of practitioner of the craft, John Deeth in the Raspberry Beret, a Democratic Party activist and noted local political blogger. It's the John Deeth blog, right? This is the name of it. We'll talk a little bit about this sort of practice. So let me switch over to David.
Well, I don't know how many of you got a chance to see my performance on The Daily Show. How many got a chance to watch that? And I know right now you're saying it's shocking how much weight television puts on and how much hair it takes off. But don't be scared. I'm the same person. It's very rare that somebody who studies something gets to be part of a moment when that something gets particular prominence in the world and in outside of research at a university. But it was a very interesting moment because I had just written this book. It had come out on Blog Wars, which was a short history of the very short history of social media and politics. Although, as Professor Gordon was talking about, I tried in the book to sort of go back in time and ask whether the phenomenon of a new media technology coming along and people finding interesting ways to use it for political persuasion actually is a pretty old one. And there's many examples you could say of that kind of thing going back thousands of years. But when I got a call, I was there at professor at the University of Kansas. I got a call from The Daily Show. They said, "Would you like to be on The Daily Show?" And I wasn't sure because I'm of that older generation that does not seek out humiliation on television. I've turned down Survivor, Housewives of Atlanta, Rich Housewives of Atlanta. I turned them all down, but because I don't like being made a fool of. But they assured me that, as a good friend of mine said, the thing about Jon Stewart is he's pretty honorable. He won't humiliate ordinary people like me, so he will humiliate like big, important Washington people. So when I went on the show, if you saw it, I was a little worried because about 3 or 4 years before, The Daily Show had done a segment on blogging where they basically made blogs to look stupid. I mean, the only people who blogged were people who were sitting in their underwear in their parents' basement with a big block of cheese, and they were sort of using their elbow to type. John, no slur intended on your fondness for Camembert or whatever. But and so they just said, well, why would you listen to somebody who has no political credentials, no university credentials, no credentials from being a journalist for years, on their opinion on the Iraq War, their opinion on the Republican primary? Why? And so that was 3 or 4 years before. And so I was worried that I was going to go on there and he'd say, why are you studying something that's this stupid? But when I went on, as you saw, Jon Stewart was saying, well, there's good blogging, there's bad blogging, blogging's become part of politics. So Jon Stewart, the most trusted newsman in America, was essentially saying, I'm giving this my imprint. Blogging has now arrived. It's part of politics. And of course, that seems like it's 1,000 years ago that social... Well, right now, the 18-year-olds at the University of Iowa are the very first generation who really, from their tween and teen years, grew up in the era of social media. I mean, the internet is older, the precursor of the internet is older. But if you could say we've really gone through 3 ages of the internet. I mean, we used to go back thousands of years, there'd be a Bronze Age and an Iron Age and so on and so on. But you could say in the age of the internet and the question about interactivity and personalization, we've been through 3 eras already during the lifetime of the average freshman here at the University of Iowa. The first one was the wonderful idealistic period of the global village, and there's a quote associated with this. One of the founders of the internet said, every time a new user joins this thing called the web, we are all enriched. Well, looking back on that, that's incredibly stupid. I'm not enriched every time a new pedophile or Al-Qaeda supporter or net Nazi joins the web. I don't gain any value from that. So that was an era where we thought everybody would just be joyfully interacting with each other and finding new friends at will. Well, within 10 years, when the Facebook, the reason that Mark Zuckerberg is eventually going to own the entire planet, is that he figured out, no, people don't want a global village where you can just interact with anyone. People want to likes, to use a Facebook term. People want to interact with people that they like or they get along with or that they trust. And so the 2.0 era of the internet was the friend part, where people are seeking a circle of friends. If you imagine your Facebook friends, and I always say I've got 323 Facebook friends, which makes me, by high school standards, a sad loser, compared to the average college student here with their thousands of friends. But generally, people are looking for friends, not just anybody. And you could say that this trend is accelerating now, where people, the Google Plus and some of the, I can't play it now, it'll take too long, but there's a wonderful new commercial for Android phones where you can actually start subdividing your friends into like former girlfriends, aunts and uncles you don't want to see any porn, things, all these different like subcategories of dividing up people. So this is the next age of sort of self-niche marketing. Well, in that selectivity, there's still one sort of core principle. And when I teach classes in political communication, I basically say, look, you're going to forget most of what you learned in this class. If you just remember one thing that I think has been true for, 50,000 years or so, and it's going to be true for another 50,000 years as long as there's anatomically modern humans on this planet. And the core principle is a very simple one, and that is successful mass communication is that which best approximates successful personal communication. We have only lived in masses for a really, really short time in the evolutionary history of human-like creatures, like just 10,000 years. You go back 5,000, 6,000, 7,000 years, and that's it in terms of large groups of people. We're still oriented. Our brains are still wired for small groups. And so we tend to impose the standards of small group success on large groups. And you know, what you want in a focus group, for example, is if your political candidate is giving a speech or a debate or talking to an auditorium or twittering or anything, on television, what you want is the people in that focus group to say, boy, I felt like he was talking to me personally. The people who we call the great communicators, whether it's a great communicator through radio or a great communicator through television or through Twitter, are the people who somehow can speak through the massness of the medium that maybe 1 million people are getting it and make individuals in the crowd or the mass feel that. How do you do that? How do you do that? How do you get personalized and personal? Well, that's really why social media became a political tool. The first instance of this, now I've only been teaching here at Iowa for 3 years, but because I'm interested in new technologies, new developments in political communication, I would always find a way to be in Iowa the summer before a presidential caucus, because that's when the political consultants and the campaigns are trying out their latest and their greatest. Political consulting, only business in the world where your product is either 0% successful or 100% successful. So you better believe these are people who really are thinking in terms of arms race of what is the latest stuff I can get to increase my billings and have my candidate win. 2003, 2004, fascinating studying this phenomenon of Howard Dean, and you could definitely call Howard Dean the 1.0 of politics. Now, Howard Dean did not win the presidency, you may have noticed. He didn't win Iowa, as you may have noticed. And I wrote a couple of book chapters and articles, and the great stuff about the Dean campaign is that all of these things are still up there, so you can go back and look at the Dean blogs and so on. And there's about 150 lessons that the Dean campaign drew for political consultants and people in political media. But one of the simplest ones was that the promise of interactivity was overpromised. In fact, one of the early Dean bloggers said, with this new wonderful technology of blogs and platform of blogs and media blogs, you, the individual people, are going to get a chance to date the candidate. Well, that was probably an overstatement of what interactivity can do in a political campaign. Because I don't know about you, but I'm happily married, but my standards of what I expect with somebody in dating are pretty high, like that they would occasionally talk to me every once in a while. And expecting a political candidate to have a personal relationship with 600,000 people, overselling, a little bit overselling. Well, that's okay. And Dean didn't win, but as I always tell my students, you know what? There's a reason why we pay test pilots a lot of money to fly, the X1 engine. We get to fly the X5 billion engine. The engines have been tested. And so the Dean campaign was trying a lot of new things, and political consultants paid attention. There really were some amazing successes that they had there in terms of fundraising, in terms of gathering clusters of people to mobilize, to do things. And so, the particular instance failed, but people were saying, okay, how can we learn from this and get better at it next cycle, next time around? Well, some of the changes that occurred very rapidly just within that time, they seem absolutely normal now, but they definitely affected the 2.0 that's coming up in 2007, 2008 with Barack Obama. One of them was the rapid acceleration of the sophistication of the cell phone. Now, 20 years ago, if I were talking here and I was a politician, I could look in here and say, are there any members of the press here today? Oh, sir, do you mind if I speak off the record and identify the 2 journalists in the room? But now, everybody in this room is a potential journalist. You all can pull out your iPhone, record me, and I say something really ridiculous, and I'm up on YouTube, and I lose my... No. I'm up on YouTube, and I'm embarrassed. Look up in YouTube. There's a whole category of teacher rant about students in high schools who try to provoke their teacher into losing their temper, and then they get them on video and put it up on... I know no Iowa student would do that, so I appreciate it. So the 2005 London bombings were actually the first time. It used to be said journalism is the first draft of history. Now you're the first draft of history, the first visual draft of history. Journalists are almost never there when breaking news breaks. It's ordinary people with their smartphone that get the first images of any breaking news event, or the only images of some news events if journalists are restricted from entering, say, a riot or a combat zone. So, first draft, visual draft of history. Well, that means the first political visual draft of history is journalists. That means a politician no longer can trust anybody in the room, including a supporter. John Dietz was just giving me an example of a recent Rick Santorum controversy came out. He was being interviewed by a conservative blogger. So it wasn't even somebody trying to get Rick Santorum. It was somebody on his side. Likewise, some of the famous, Barack Obama's famous bitter comments. Those were caught very vaguely on a cell phone of a supporter in a room of a fundraising moment of Obama in San Francisco. So you can't even trust your friends. By the way, this is good advice for you when you're going on the job market and the new background search is social media. Don't trust what the pictures your friends have put up for you on what we find on Google search. In the bar, if somebody takes a funny picture of you, that's going to be the first picture we find on the Google search. Little advice there. Another event that was occurring, I'm always interested when a historical need intersects with the development of a new technology, because there are plenty of times in the past. The steam engine is a very good example, was invented by the ancient Greeks. Not much came of it. I mean, they used it for interesting things like creating pneumatic doors, so when you entered the temple of Zeus, the doors would go whoosh. That was great, but they didn't say, hey, let's put it on a railroad and invent industry or anything like that. But when a new technology comes along, there's also some social developments that may be happening concurrently. And there really was, at the same time as social media was accelerating, there was a revolt going on by people against the so-called Golden Rolodex. The Golden Rolodex was simply put that if you're a journalist and you want to quote somebody for a story, you've got a little book, or now you've got a Microsoft contact file of I want to do a story on the American Revolution, and there's a UI professor who wrote 3 books on the American Revolution. And that still exists. But now with the billions and billions of people speaking up through Facebook or blogs or Twitter accounts or Tumblr or anything like that, experts to some extent have been dethroned. You see that in the world of movies. I mean, how many times have you seen a headline in an ad for a movie, the roller coaster ride of the summer, and in a little tiny print it'll be timmysblogbuzz.com. They don't care if it's Time Magazine or timmysblogbuzz.com. All they want is the headline. The movie company is advertising it. So in a lot of fields, the expert is sort of losing his or her independent value, which I hate because I like to claim some tiny expertise in some things. By the way, I find it funny that my graduate student who I assigned to get some pictures to represent these professions picked this for professor. Make nothing of it. Another fascinating instance of this, which I actually participated a little bit in, is I was blogging at the time, 2005, 2007, and I noticed something interesting. I was watching television, the mainstream media, and what was the mainstream media telling me? They were telling me Hillary Rodham Clinton was going to be the next president of the United States. There wasn't even going to be a race. Why was anybody even bothering to run against her? She had $1 trillion. She had lined up all these amazing endorsements. Everybody big in the Democratic Party had endorsed her. She had the constituency. She had the organization. I mean, it was called Hillary and the Seven Dwarfs. That was what the race was called. But I wrote a little article which actually got a lot of attention on a lot of blogs, and it was just a mild observation because I was doing this study of left-wing Democratic political blogs, and I noticed that a lot of them were really dissatisfied. A lot of them saying, wait a minute, we don't want Hillary, we don't want another Clinton, we don't want somebody who we think is a closet conservative, we don't like Hillary, Hillary's too much baggage. In other words, the left-wing blogs, which did represent a lot of the people who were going to vote, were going to give money, who were going to organize, who were going to be part of the Democratic process in electing a president in their primary caucus system, were really dissatisfied. But the mainstream media was ignoring that, like, oh yeah, these blog things are talking about we need another candidate. Well, luckily, one of the things I put in my book, which came out a week before the January caucus in 2008, where a certain person named Barack Obama won, was that, there's an opening there. There's an opening among many, many Democratic voters for if you had somebody who was fresher, newer, really tied into this new technology, not seen to be part of the old Democratic machine, and a certain senator from Illinois, I think, almost like a role cast for him, stepped into that role. Within just 4 or 5 years, you saw people who worked, and in those days, blog equals social media. Facebook was just coming along, MySpace was just peaking, but when people talk about blogs, essentially it's what we talk about with social media. Bloggers took over politics, and it's a very simple reason. Of course, younger people, if you look at political campaigns, 90% of the people in a political campaign are young people. And they tend to be run by older people, but the people who get involved and the young staffers are young people. So, sure, they're the digital natives. They got involved. They started using this stuff right away. Political journalists started using it. Politicians, political workers, basically everybody involved in politics. Politicians, they still went to the AFL-CIO dinner and the Jefferson-Jackson dinner, but now when they were visiting Ottumwa, they would say, are there any local political bloggers? I'll have a lunch for local political bloggers. So bloggers became both a constituency and a group that you were trying to attract and organize at the same time. And this all happened extremely rapidly. I mean, I really think you had almost 1,000 years of political evolution compressed into 5 years. That's why I think it's something very interesting. And now everybody hires bloggers, blog outreach coordinator, social media this, social media that, and you just see them all over the place in every campaign. Well, Obama did come along. And, by the way, when I say Obama, I really mean the Obama campaign, because I'm not saying necessarily, although Obama is, quasi-digital, younger than, say, John McCain, who he was running against. There were many people associated with his campaign that put this emphasis on these new technologies, text messaging, blogging. They all poured a lot of money into it. The Clinton campaign strategy was sort of like the buy blogger, like they'd say, will you work for us? While the Obama campaign was more like, how can we reinvent and use something with blogging? There's a big difference between the two. Fundraising, that's where you really get somebody's attention when you start raising lots of money. And the improvement, the 2.0, why Obama was 2.0 and Dean was 1.0, was that the Obama campaign was ingenious in saying, hey, please give money to us via our social media site. But here's another idea. Why don't you form your own social media site and raise money from your friends? Friends like friends, raising money from friends. Pretty good idea. Raising lots of money. Raising lots of money always gets politicians and political media attention. There was a certain niche at psychographics. Psychographics is how people think about things, not just what they are. But Barack Obama won the Iowa caucus youth vote by the widest margin recorded ever. And I don't think it was just because he was seen as somebody who was strong on youth issues, because it's always a question in any campaign, which I'll end my presentation, what is a youth issue? But I think the fact that he was reaching out much more aggressively and that he just sort of fit in as a digital native made him much more attractive to younger voters in the first place. Almost immediately, the mainstream media was, oh, wow, there's a lot of stuff going on here. They also started noticing the ad revenue that was possible with these new technologies. But here's the key, and this is why Obama was the 2.0 and Dean was the 1.0. The Obama campaign from the very beginning knew you can't be elected president of the United States because you have a great blog. You have to combine the new and the old together. So Obama campaign did fantastic get out the vote, traditional, going to somebody's door, calling them on the phone, you need to ride to the polls. They did wonderful old politics. They did everything right that you'd need to be elected president in 1960, but they added all the new things. And that combination is really why I think in terms of a campaign, I can't talk about the individual issue, in terms of campaign, why the Obama campaign was as successful as it was. In our most recent election cycle, I just taught a class over the winter on the caucus and the blogs, and Mr. Deeth came and spoke there. This was a year where obviously a lot of new social media technology platforms were prominent. Tweeting, I think Twitter tweeting probably got more attention than anything else. It was seen as one of the newest and most pervasive tools. I noticed in terms of news stories where there's somebody did a story about politics and social media, Twitter tended to get the most attention. It was certainly the easiest, the fastest. And a lot of people saw it as the sort of most symbolic, especially the 140 characters, as most symbolic of how fast, how short, how just instant social media was. So a big deal and a big difference there. Now, one of the interesting questions for me was that way back thousands of years ago in 2007, 2008, I was wondering whether people cared whether when you saw a blog post from a candidate or a politician, whether people cared whether it was actually the candidate or it was the staff. We sort of accept, most people know that when a candidate comes up and gives a speech, it's probably a speech that's mostly written by somebody else, although we sort of have a romantic fantasy that they read it before they read it to you, or that they actually agree with what's in the speech. You know, maybe I'm old-fashioned that way. But what about something as personal as a blog post or a Twitter, and especially somebody saying in the first person? Does it matter? And what was interesting was that increasingly it showed that people didn't care. And I've seen this in my own work, is that people understood, for example, Ron Paul had, as you know, a lot of young supporters. I never met a Ron Paul supporter who was shocked to find that Ron Paul didn't write most of his own tweets, you know, because they just said, yeah, he's a 76-year-old guy, he probably doesn't know how to tweet. And I think he admitted this in the commercial, where he didn't know what, in an interview, he didn't know what it was. So people sort of accepted it. Well, as long as it's saying what, you know, we think somebody should be saying, or we think that the candidate's saying, or even that it's done by people who support them. I mean, this is what's interesting, is you see all these surrogate campaigns, all these other campaigns, people twittering in response, retumbling, creating new value, creating new messages at the same time. So the question of authorship has even become more hazy. And what I thought might possibly be an issue to voters, at least for the voters who are, like you, most of you in this room, digital natives, doesn't seem to be that big an issue at all. So a couple of lessons that we've learned in wrapping up here. One is internet, digital, social media has now become just an integral part of campaigns. Nobody sees it as an afterthought or a fluffy thing that just will do because everybody else is doing. In fact, even it's accelerating them trying to figure out how to integrate this even further. And it works. It works in limited ways. Again, I'm never, even though I'm fascinated by this stuff, I'm never going to claim somebody is elected president just because they had a great tweet. But it does work in the sense of helping get messages out extremely rapidly, especially in response to somebody else's message, by the way. It does help you reach multiple constituencies very quickly, including constituencies like, say, people under the age of 30 who don't read a newspaper and don't watch the evening news and basically are impenetrable to anything except digital media. It helps you build constituencies, including asking people to build their own constituencies. It's just like, hey, you know, I need supporters in this town. Can you organize yourself? And certainly, overwhelmingly, it is an incredibly cheap and effective fundraising tool. Well, and probably the key, the reason that political consultant media workers know that this is the future is that they know that as a cohort of voters ages, that's the digital natives. You now have people who are, since essentially the internet became a commercial medium in 1989, you're basically on your second generation of people who are internet natives, first generation who are social media natives. Well, those people will get older, they'll be able to give more money, they're more going to increase in their likelihood to vote. And so it's just an investment in the future to continually invest in social media. But again, big lesson from Obama that nobody has said any different just because we have all these wonderful new platforms, and that is that, yep, the old and the new have to work together. You can't just go digital or ignore digital. You have to have them work together. And every campaign is in agreement with that. Also, really important for digital to work up and down the campaign. Digital can't just be 5 guys in a room and the campaign headquarters saying what their tweet of the day is going to be. The whole point of viral is to know what other people are saying. So campaigns have to listen as well as to send and receive. And the campaigns which are more sophisticated than that are able to respond faster, especially to any rumor or any event that's going on in the digital world. By the way, this is what corporate America is doing like crazy as well, to try to use these digital means to sort of know what's going on around them. And basically, you need a top team. You need the best possible people working for you. And there's a huge competition to hire the more sophisticated, the more technically knowledgeable, but also the most creative people which is a fantastic opportunity for our students because they get these jobs because nobody's going to hire somebody my age to do this. They're going to hire a 23-year-old and a 24-year-old to be the expert in this. It's a wonderful opportunity there. Now, I want to end with one interesting just observation about this is that you can see a lot of campaigns. There were different type ways to try to appeal to youth voters. This is a Ron Paul ad. And I had one of my students said he showed this ad to his grandfather. His grandfather had to walk away because he got a heart attack because, I had a headache, excuse me, because I think we're just moving around too fast on the screen. And it really is an ad sort of aimed at younger voters. And certainly Ron Paul did receive a very high percentage of young people who did vote. But one thing that's fascinated me year after year, I had 8 years ago, I taught a class on debates and the presidential election, and I had my students watch every single presidential debate. And I asked them to identify times when people brought up issues that resonated with them, with 18 to 22-year-old voters. And they got really frustrated because debate after debate went by and they couldn't find any issues that the candidates were bringing up. And I just thought it was fascinating to me that we have this technology that is absolutely a youth technology. Its main attraction is to youth in politics and sort of style, but we don't have any identifiable youth issues. And in my interim class of 33 students, I purposely waited until 2/3 of the class was over in time, and I said, anybody here noticed any candidate talking about issues which were specifically youth issues? And one student said, well, I saw Ron Paul talk about marijuana reform, but he sort of whispered it and downplayed it and then moved on to something else. And that was about it. A really big issue, like, say, student debt. This is a wonderful little graphic here of student debt in the year 2000 versus the student debt today. Obama brought up a new student debt plan. I was stunned because it didn't become a political issue. Republicans didn't even bother to attack him on it because they just didn't feel it was going to be an issue. So I think it's an interesting dichotomy here, and my little crossed out slide. Why don't candidates target youth concerns? And there are a lot of reasons, including reasons that political consultants will give you off the record, including their belief that, young people will get all excited but then fall asleep on election day and not go out and vote, whereas grandma 92 will drag herself, on her deathbed to go vote. So there's a perception that older voters, which is played out in fact. Well, this is a very good example of youth votes here. As you see, youth as share of caucus still is pretty low, and so it's still interesting how in the political arena the political consultants are very well willing to use this new technology. They know it's important, but it has not translated into the issues of digital natives. Like, for example, student loan debt, which I think is a pretty big issue for most people in this room, becoming substantive issues in the campaign. Thank you.
Well, that was great. One of the nicest things about Colin inviting me to this class, which I've come to for a number of years, is I get to listen to other smart people, and I get to learn. So, The Daily Show, I have never been asked to be on, but I can tell you that I helped run the University of Iowa Hockey Poll with help from a lot of people in this room. And somebody once in the room came up and said, and our polls were getting covered in the New York Times, the Washington Post, and all over the mass media, and someone came up and said, hey, we should release the poll and have it be called the Tolbert Report. And at that point I realized that since my family does come originally from Normandy, why am I Tolbert? And Colbert has that really great sounding name, so I was just at the conference, people were joking. So David, I'm a political scientist, and believe it or not, political science has been a little slow to understand how new media is fundamental, and the internet has fundamentally changed politics. I've been writing on this topic since 2001, so now 10 years. And when I first sent our first paper out to be published that showed that people who were getting their political news and election news online were actually more likely to vote, more likely to give money, or more likely to contribute, and this is controlling for all other demographic factors and whether they use television or radio news. And the reviewer came back and said, but what's the theory? How is the internet different than television or radio or newspapers? And somehow we did come up with a theory. We talked about the fact that it was one-to-one communication, small group, and mass all at once versus traditional media, which tends to be mass media. But luckily, that article became one of the most cited articles in this world of new media and politics. And it opened the doors for lots of work that we've continued to do, both on the great opportunity of the internet for politics and for society in general, but also these persistent inequality issues. Pitch is right there. Pitch in the back is doing great work on the internet worldwide and digital protests. So there's lots of things. I'm going to talk about the United States. So Digital Citizenship is a book, actually it came out in 2007 with my co-authors Karen Mossberger and Ramona McNeil. And our latest book is coming out with Oxford. It's called Digital Cities. And our first book was on the digital divide. Let me show you a little bit. This is from the FCC, this is the federal government, and they say, like railroads and highways, broadband accelerates the velocity of commerce, reducing the cost of distance. Like electricity, it creates a platform for America's creativity, just in better ways to solve old problems. Like broadcasting, it expands our ability to communicate, inform, and entertain. Broadband is the great infrastructure challenge of the early 21st century. But as with electricity and telephony, ubiquitous connections are a means, not an end. It is what those connections enable that matters. And basically what the FCC, I apologize for not being able to read that very well, so I skipped some words. It's hard to kind of look this close. But we have evolved into a digital society. So not only is politics digital, but we as humans have become digital citizens. The way we communicate for our jobs, for school, for news, for politics, for health information, for transportation, for public safety. Did anybody get a hawk alert today? Did anybody get an email with a hawk alert? The phones were ringing. All that technology was going. That was public safety. Anybody ever have a headache or a knee ache or some problem? What's the first thing you do? You type into Google News your symptoms and you get WebMD. How do you apply for a job now? Monster.com. In my day, there was classified ads in the newspaper. That's how we got a job. So in all of these ways, really we have evolved. Obviously, the metaphors are huge. There's a wonderful new book by Daryl West called The Next Wave, and Edward Glaser, The Triumph of Cities, and they argue that the internet is like the printing press, really causing a revolution in information worldwide. The Arab Spring and protests worldwide are examples of that. So the metaphors are just all over the place in how transformational this period is. Does anybody know when the computer was invented? How long have we been doing this? 84? Was it 84, the first Macintosh computer?
Yeah.
84. Okay, guys, 84. Do the math, but it's not very long.
During the Bronze Age, that's right.
Oh, the Bronze Age. So, and the internet itself, you date it to?
Well, the commercial internet. I mean, there was the military internet. Yeah.
But the commercial.
In 1989.
89. I remember. Yeah. Okay. A little bit, very recently, that kind of put in perspective this. Oh my goodness, society has changed. Was January 18, 2012, when the internet blacked out. Does anybody remember that? Right, aware? you went to Google and the Google images was black. And if you went to Wikipedia, the Wikipedia page was black. And if you went to go buy something online, Craigslist, it was black. And thousands of websites blacked out all over the internet. And they did so because the federal government was considering some regulation called SOPA and HIPAA to regulate the internet, which could have been very disruptive for free communication online. And so we saw, so not only did these protests succeed, and unbelievably or not, legislation that was going to be passed by the U.S. House and by Senate and the U.S. Senate. Chris Dodd had made sure that it had so much money, so much lobbying, it was an inside deal, got turned around in one day. It was unheard of. We have never seen the kind of government, corporate lobbying machine with legislation going through Congress got railroaded in one day, like what we saw on January 18th. So one, it taught old politics and government that new media and new media corporations, Google, Facebook, have teeth. But two, it's a lesson that we're all still digesting right now, that this world of politics online, that there's also digital politics. So there's Occupy Wall Street, but this really had very few protesters on the street. It was largely a digital protest, but the scale was amazing. 4 million people looked up their members of Congress, and there were 160 million people who visited Wikipedia. How many people live in the United States? Give me a guess. 300 million. Put in perspective how many people visited Wikipedia to see the blacked out page with the statement, stop Congress from censoring the internet. Google users also faced this blacked out bar with a logo that read, "Tell Congress, please don't censor the web." It was one of the first times we saw Google, which we use like the telephone book. We use it like the encyclopedia. We use it all the time. I use Google 50 times a day. And all of a sudden Google was talking to me. Something's wrong. And 10 million people signed an online petition. Congress was flooded with phone calls. Thousands and thousands of phone calls. So there'll be books written about this. Hopefully someday I will help write a book about this, because this is very interesting and really a watershed mark that showed the scale of what we're talking about. I think David already covered quite a bit of this, but the internet is changing American society. It's changing democracy. Just even 20 years ago, the majority of Americans got their news by a daily newspaper, watching the evening news on one of the network channels, the local evening news, or from radio. Now, today, more Americans read their news online than a print newspaper. In fact, the print newspaper industry has faced historic crisis, financial issues. Advertisers prefer to advertise online than print newspapers. Online news is much more diverse than traditional news. And in the 21st century, we argue that Americans have become digital citizens. And I should say that book was published in 2007, and I did have to go to Amazon.com and just type in the word digital citizenship, and there were about 10 more books that have come out after that. Digital citizenship in education, digital citizenship in lots of places. Let me tell you about it. So digital politics is one of the things digital citizens do. Obviously, there's this niche media that tailors news, bloggers and Twitters, every topic, news aggregators, that's Google News, Real Clear Politics, I study politics. I want to know how Santorum's doing, and Gingrich, and Romney, and Hall. I go to Real Clear Politics, I can see every poll that's conducted in every state breaking every single day. And I can see, Gingrich is going to win South Carolina, Romney's going to win Florida. It's amazing what's happening. Social network, very important. Maybe I just have a lot of political friends, but I have a lot of posts about the politics in my network. And so I can actually know how people are reading the news by going to Facebook. Because I see my friends posting, and I'm not just getting the article, I'm getting their spin on the article. And their spin, of course, trusted network, is more important than reading an anonymous story, even in the New York Times, which we call the record, the paper, the record of the day. So what are digital citizens? They're daily internet users. They turn to the internet for politics and news, on a laptop, smartphone, other devices. They use the internet every day, all the time, at work, employment, for education, health, transportation. Can you drive anymore without Google Maps? I can't. I can't drive anymore without Google Maps traffic. I was just in Houston and Dallas. I was driving all over. The traffic was hideous. I had to see, okay, now I'm facing yellow. No, now I'm going to hit red. I couldn't even navigate without knowing how bad it was. Weather, we need rain, entertainment, and so much more. Digital citizenship, or the ability to participate in society online, and we argue you need regular home access, and skills is critical. So you need literacy skills, and you need regular home access. We argue high-speed home access to be a digital citizen. Digital citizenship, our work has shown, has positive spillover benefits. So regular home high-speed access. For economic opportunity, for politics, individuals that use the internet at work have higher wages, even those with only a high school degree, as I told you before, using political information of all forms, blogs, email, social network, online news, makes you, controlling for everything else, more likely to vote, to give money, more interested, more knowledgeable, more likely to discuss politics with friends and family. And so because of this, we argue that throughout history, citizenship has required access to the prevailing form of communication. In the 19th century, that was literacy. Slaves were able to go to the north and have a chance for economic opportunity if they could learn to read. Books and newspapers were the primary medium for communication, and literacy and education created opportunity, and it created freedom. If being online is now necessary for full participation in society, and I do ask you if you can just turn everything off, I mean nothing, you can't use the internet, cell phone, anything for a week, what would you miss first? Try it for 2 weeks, try it for 3 weeks, turn it, nothing. I know, I have 2 teenagers. I take their cell phones when they get in trouble. That is their form of punishment now. That's their time out. I just take the cell phones. Anyway, so we argue the correct metaphor for access, not railroads, not electricity grids, but maybe education. Maybe education and digital literacy. Maybe it's like public education because it's information. The internet is information. So in much the same way that education and literacy promoted democracy and economic growth in the 19th and 20th centuries, digital literacy has the potential to benefit society as a whole in the 21st century. So let me just tell you, if it's so important, why isn't everybody online? And it may seem like everybody's online because you are in the top 20% of Americans who will have a college degree, and at a Big Ten university to boot. But there's many barriers to access in a digital society, and I think that's why Colin asked me to come. There are inequalities across individuals, and we're going to talk about that, and one of the biggest barriers is cost and affordability. There's also inequalities across geographic areas, rural areas that are lacking broadband infrastructure, but also poor areas, cities, high minority, high poverty. There's a debate about mobile versus broadband access that we talk about in our new book, Digital Cities, whether mobile access alone is sufficient, and we argue it's not. Okay, so let me just show you a little bit. This is 210, so I know we're about a year and a half off, but it hasn't actually changed that much. I wish it had. Unlike, what would it be that fell so low in prices? Was it the digital watch? Or was it the calculator that the cost got so low that everybody could have? So, why isn't this happening? Why isn't technology following the way of the TV, where 98% of households have a television? In 2010, 62% of Americans had broadband at home. This is actually the 2011 report from the FCC and the federal government. Few points higher in 211, 212, not much. We, as I said before, we are high-speed home access is required. If you're going to be online for all these things, you got to have it at home. That means 24 hours a day, and it's got to be fast. You can't have it be the slow dial-up access. That means almost 4 in 10 Americans are either offline or less connected. Less connected people would have only mobile access on their smartphones, or they'd only use high-speed access at school or at a library, public access. If you go to minorities, only 45% of Latinos have high-speed access at home, and 50% of African Americans have high-speed at home. In fact, the majority of African Americans and Latinos were the less connected in 210. So there's huge inequalities. This is the 210 data. This is your probability of having high-speed at home, whether you live in urban areas, suburban, or rural. So in urban areas, 70% of whites have high speed at home, but only 47% of Latinos, 54% of blacks. Rural, you can see very low for African Americans, rural and suburban, a little bit higher. But lots of inequality. For a digital society where everyone's supposed to be online, they're not all online. Actually, among Latinos, if you are Spanish-speaking only, you have only a 35% probability of having broadband at home. Latinos not only face affordability issues, but also skill issues and language issues. This is by income, and so as your income rises, you have a much higher probability of being online. But for those with the lowest income, whether you're an urban, suburban, or rural American, you only have a 40% probability of having high-speed access at home. This is by education. You can go look at you. You guys are going to be over there. That means almost all of you will have high-speed broadband at home. But if you have, if you've just got a high school degree here, it's only about 6 in 10 Americans. Why do people? These are we ask in our surveys, but also the current population survey asks if you don't have high-speed internet at home, why? This is the percentage of the people that say too expensive or no computer. And as you can see, it's actually higher among Latinos and blacks, especially in urban areas, but also in suburban areas that say that they have no computer or they can't afford it. So will mobile access bridge the digital divide? This is a really big thing right now because actually of the smartphone and mobile internet users, Latinos and African Americans are a big group. 1/3 of Americans are now using internet-enabled smartphones. I have one. I didn't used to have one. I got my daughter's iPhones before I got one, but now I love mine. The rhetoric argues it might bridge the divide. We argue it's valuable, but it's not sufficient for the range of activities online. And this is from Susan Crawford in the New York Times. And she actually argues that mobile-only internet, mobile-only, is second-class access, and that you can't do the range of activities online, like apply for a job and use it for work and really follow politics and news on only a mobile device. And I'm going to show you some graphs. So this is the probability of doing these different activities if you are mobile access only versus if you have broadband at home. So do you look for community news online? Have you ever looked for community news online? 55% of the less connected, 80% of home broadband. There's a 25-point difference. This is 210. And you can kind of scroll down. Actually, it's the difference column we care about over there, because that second column are digital citizens. Those are the ones. And this is online banking. There's entertainment. This is applying for jobs. It's up and down. So I don't know if you know, and my time's going to be up here in a minute, and I can skim through these, but our federal government has not invested very much money into broadband infrastructure or to addressing the social inequalities that underlie the digital divide. In many countries all over Europe, they have invested many times more than our country. The United States actually ranks low, 15th in broadband subscribers per 100 inhabitants. The average download speed in the U.S. Is slow compared to most of the OECD countries. 12 of the 24 OECD nations had lower monthly subscription rates. That means it's cheaper than in the U.S., even for the slowest speed. And we basically relied on Comcast and AT&T and the private corporations to build the networks compared to public investment in these other countries. Here's a map of the average. So it's expensive. We don't cover everyone. We don't cover the rural areas. And it's slow. And you can look. We are here. This is the average broadband speed in the United States. And you can see how many countries do better than us. One of the reasons is this is a map of the population density in the United States, and light-colored yellow is rural. So you guys know how much of Iowa is covered, right? And there are lots of other states in the United States that aren't covered. We're big, and we're rural, and it's hard. South Korea has very high, fast broadband, and much higher than what we have. They're small. Okay, so one of the things is there is public policy here. This is Colin's thing, is that Obama, with the stimulus plan in 2008, included $7.2 billion worth of investment and a national broadband plan. We had never had anything before. So it was the beginning. It was the seed of federal policy to try to look at both opportunity and inequality. And recently, the FCC, do you guys, anybody have a landline phone anymore? Pay a tax? Well, that used to go to build telephone wires in rural areas, and now it goes to build broadband in rural areas. So they switched that. That's going to add $4 billion annually. The problem is that it would cost $350 billion to have broadband nationwide. So none of this is going to help us at all. And that money that was spent right there, the $4 million, the $7.2 billion, 92% of it went to rural access. Does anybody know what percentage of Americans live in metropolitan areas? Iowa City and Cedar Rapids is a metropolitan area. 85% of Americans live in metropolitan areas. So federal government spent over 90% of the money where 15% of Americans live. And they spent almost no money where most of Americans live. So we argue that federal policy has overlooked cities and inequality in cities and need in cities, spending money on infrastructure and failing to address important barriers such as cost and especially a lack of competition. In many countries, they have competition for access. Here, Iowa City just gives what? One cable company? That's it? We got one cable company, right? Two? Good, two? We have DSL, right? We have DSL with, whatever. So, and then there's also the cable company. Some people argue cities is where we should be investing. Spillover benefits for all those policy areas. Arts, the economy, higher education, healthcare are all greater. Investment in technology in cities gives you more bang for the buck. And we, in the book, rank cities. So these are the top 15 cities for broadband access at home. The percentage of the population that actually has broadband at home in 2010. Look at Seattle. Are you surprised? San Francisco and San Jose and Virginia Beach and Boston and San Diego and Austin. Those are the digital cities. And this is where most of the population is online. But look, these are the cities at the bottom. These are the bottom 15. San Antonio, 44% of the population has broadband at home. And Cleveland, 46%. So there's lots of cities that are falling behind in digital. These are neighborhoods in Chicago. And we also map broadband, use of broadband at home, high speed at home across Chicago neighborhoods. This is the percent Black and Latino population. This is the percent below the poverty line, and that's the percent that has home broadband. You guys have been to the Michigan Mile? Do you know what we're talking about? In all those fancy neighborhoods? Those are the dark areas. See, the dark. That's where, this is just neighborhoods in Chicago. This is where, 73 to 90% of the population is online. Those white areas, 15 to 45% is online. So inequality across cities, inequality across neighborhoods, and these maps just show the same things, but for using the internet for political information, the economy, health. So Wikipedia, I know that professors didn't used to like Wikipedia because they thought it was for, what, looking up stuff. But Jimmy Wales gave a talk here. Did anybody go to Jimmy Wales' talk last year? Just at the student union? And he argued that the internet is information. And I thought Jimmy Wales rocked. And Jimmy Wales argues that the internet is information and knowledge. It can do all these things. It also creates inequality for those without access or the skills to use it. So we argue government policy should address social inequalities and barriers based on cost. And the United Nations actually declared internet access a human right. They meant don't shut off the internet, like in Egypt. But we also mean if you're offline because of poverty or a lack of education, you have a diminished capacity to be a digital. Thanks.
Give you a little of my background and how this whole thing came to be for me, and where I see digital citizenship and citizen journalism going. I actually came down to Iowa City about 20 years ago as a traditional professional journalist. I was working up at WSUI Public Radio at the time, and I enjoyed being a journalist, but I had a lot of frustration with a couple of things. First of all, I didn't feel like I had enough personality, enough opportunity to get personality into my work, and I really felt straitjacketed by the paradigm of objectivity, of tell both sides and don't take a side. A couple of stories stand out to me. There was a rumor of a protest at the Emma Goldman Clinic, and several hundred people got together to keep the clinic open, to defend the clinic doors, and the anti-choice protesters never showed up. And so I told the story, and I got chewed out because I didn't tell both sides of the story. Well, to me, the story was only one side was there. So, but the one that really stuck with me was when David Yepsen, the famous Des Moines Register writer, chewed me out because I had a political bumper sticker on my car. I'd already made the mistake of stumbling into Democratic headquarters shortly after I got to town, and I was trying to have it both ways. I was trying to be a political activist and a journalist, and I got told in no uncertain terms by the dean of the Iowa Press Corps at the time that that wasn't allowed. You couldn't clock out as a journalist and go down to headquarters and make phone calls. And so I felt like, this is about 1992, I felt like I had to make a choice. I chose politics over journalism. I dropped out of grad school, quit my assistantship, went to work for the State Democratic Party, and we overthrew the President of the United States that year, which was kind of fun. A couple years later, I got the crazy notion that, hey, maybe I should run for the legislature. That didn't work out quite so well, so I wound up back here. So I played a lot of different roles in the political process. I've been a writer, I've been a campaign staffer, I've been a candidate, and now I work in the local election office. That's what I call my day job. And in the course of my life, I got to build sort of my alternative credential instead of the PhD that I originally set out to get, by working on campaigns, by just being personal friends with the political power structure here in town. And then about 9 years ago now, I was bored one night. I was going through divorce, long story, and I decided, hey, I've heard about this thing called blogs, and I'm just going to play around with this a little bit and put something together. And so I started doing that, just for something to keep myself occupied. I'd throw up the usual, here's a link to a story, oh, here's my cat, wasn't he cute that day, etc., etc. And then, after I did that for a couple of years, I noticed something. I found a little traffic counter to keep track. Back in the Internet 1.0, you used to have your hit counter on your website. It was kind of tacky, but I started noticing that when, in the course of my life, I went to a lot of political events, and sometimes I'd write about them. Like I'd pretend I was a journalist or something. And I noticed that when I did that, people were reading me. And so I decided, okay, I'm going to dust off those old journalism skills, take this a little bit seriously, and see what happens. And this was about 2 2006 or so. This was after the Dean campaign had happened, after Daily Kos had kind of become a fixture in the liberal blogosphere was the word that started coming out around that time. It was pre-Facebook. This was back in the MySpace era, if any of you remember that. And there were a half a dozen, maybe 10 political blogs across Iowa, both on the left and on the right, and we kind of got this critical mass of a blogosphere. And so I kept writing. I tried to do my best at it. The traffic started growing. The traffic kept growing. The traffic kept growing. It doubled over the course of a quarter. It doubled again over the course of the next quarter. And the 2006 election cycle happened to be a really exciting one. And so I kind of made my niche, whether I wanted to or not. And then in early 2007, I got a couple of emails from some folks who said, we like what you're doing. We want to give you money and we want you to do more of it. And I kind of, money? Oh, sure, I'll do that. And that was the beginning of Iowa Independent, which was a leading site for several years here in Iowa. There were about 8 of us at the beginning, and boy, that was a super group. It was basically the super group of liberal Iowa political bloggers. And our MO was, okay, you know where we're coming from. We're coming from the left, but we're serious journalists. We want to do serious work, and so tell us what you got to say. And we covered the 2007-2008 caucus cycle like a carpet, and I thought they were going to shut us down after the caucuses were done, but they kept going. Iowa turned out to be a swing state in 2008. We kept going. I stumbled into some really good stories, and then the day after the presidential election got done, I got laid off. So by this time, I'd gotten the bug, and I kept doing it anyway. One of the best things I've read about writing recently was actually on cracked.com of all places. It was titled, Why Writing for the Internet is the Best Job in the World. And the part of it that sticks with me is if you're a writer, you're going to do it whether you're paid or not. You do it because you love doing it. And I was in that trap, and so I just kept doing it. Okay, so the paycheck's not coming anymore. I still got the day gig back down at the courthouse. I'm going to keep doing this. And I kind of found a niche. Professor Redlosk used to say, you don't have that many readers, John, but you've got the right readers. I get about 400 readers a day. But it's almost entirely from Iowa, and it's almost entirely from the political structure of Iowa. Half of my traffic is coming from Des Moines, and a lot of it's got state legislature on it, and or getting stuff from the congressional staff. They're paying attention to what I'm saying. And I decided as a writer, I'm going to write the story that I want to read that I'm not seeing. And so I focus on a lot of political number crunching. There's some national sites that used to do that. Swing State Project was a really good one until Daily Kos annexed it. It's still good, but it's now Daily Kos Elections. And I'm kind of doing that for Iowa. When redistricting happened, I did a series called District of the Day, where I went through 100 legislative districts. If you're into that kind of thing, I think I did okay with that. And so I see citizen journalism as being the future of journalism. There was a big story today. The Gannett Corporation, which is kind of the 800-pound gorilla of Dead Tree newspapers, is going to a new model for their websites. Over the course of the next year or so, the time frame is kind of vague, they're going to start converting their sites to a pay model, where you're going to have to get a membership and log in and give them some money. I think that's the newspaper industry has got the dumbest attitude toward the internet of anybody this side of the entertainment industry. On the internet, the default price is free, which is a good thing, except that means that the default paycheck is also free. And I know that I've, to some extent, been limited in my writing by the need to make an income and earn a living and feed children and pay for their internet access and laptop computers and things. So I had to miss a few events during the 2011 caucus cycle, but that was okay. I wrote what I could. I wrote what I could. I tried to fill my niche, and I felt like it worked out okay. And I think David talked a little bit about the old model of partisan journalism. And I think we're going to return to some of that. If anybody is going to be paying people to write for the internet about politics in the near future, I don't think it's going to be advertisers anymore. I think it's going to be interest groups, political parties. I mean, you're already seeing that in the big leagues to some extent with Fox and MSNBC, but I think it'll continue on and hopefully trickle down to the citizen level, to people like me down on the local level. There was some of that in the Iowa Independent Project, and I think there's going to be more of it in the future. Now, what that does to traditional objective journalism, I don't know, but the old model is being torn down. The new model just hasn't quite been built yet. And I guess one thing I'd like to add before we, take our break here is that a citizen journalist never knows when the big story is going to hit, when their little corner of the world is all of a sudden going to be ground zero of the news. I'm thinking in particular of the guy who accidentally live tweeted the Osama bin Laden raid. He's just twittering to his friends, hey, there's a whole bunch of explosions and helicopters going on. I wonder what's happening. The other one I'm thinking of recently is the Caffeinated Thoughts, which is a conservative Iowa blog, did an interview back maybe October or so with Rick Santorum, who was way down in about the 2% range in the polls at that time, where he talked at great length about the immorality of contraception. Well, last week I saw that interview being replayed on Hardball with Chris Matthews. And the big one hit back last fall, but it didn't get the attention until just now. My biggest story ever was when I was covering a low-profile surrogate event in September of 2008. There was this brief window of time when the Sarah Palin thing kind of seemed like it was a good idea until she opened her mouth and started talking. And McCain actually shot up to the point where the polls were dead even. And Kathleen Sebelius, who was then the governor of Kansas and is now, of course, Health and Human Services Secretary, made the comment that maybe, just maybe, some people might not like Barack Obama because he's African American. And I'm live blogging that, okay, that's interesting, I'm going to go with this. And that got picked up on the front page of the Drudge Report, which will get you 20,000 readers an hour. So I got lucky with that one. You never know when your little corner of the world is going to be the center of the world in a 24-hour news cycle. So I can have more to say during the questions, and thanks.